So we have Mr. Bret Gregory, founder of DrTalks.
Doing interviews was a great way to build a business. And it was just by accident that we discovered that. Sadly, in 2006, my 32-year-old brother, Eric, was diagnosed with stage 4 non-small cell carcinoma.
Yeah, so what makes a great podcast topic or headline for doctors?
The doctors who are on our platform absolutely loved that. They said, "Hey, this is great, but I want this on my website."
Bret, will you tell us about Dr. Talks and how you founded Dr. Talks and what it's all about?
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks, Austin and Rakesh, for having me. So, I'm the founder of DrTalks, and my story, my evolution of how I came to be the founder of DrTalks was I had a employee benefits company from 1996 to 2006 for a decade, and during that time, I had a talk radio show. And from being the host of that talk radio show, I discovered that doing interviews was a great way to build a business. And it was just by accident that we discovered that. Over a 4-year period, we interviewed CEOs of big companies and lots of different employees from these large companies. And we were able to translate that into a pretty large employee benefits company. Sadly, in 2006, my 32-year-old brother, Eric, was diagnosed with stage 4 non small cell carcinoma. He ended up passing away about 9 months later, peacefully in our father's arms. And that event just totally rocked my world. I had to, look at, okay, what am I doing with my life and my career? I tore off my suit and tie. I sold my successful financial advisory business that, I started from scratch. I moved to Costa Rica. I purchased a 164-acre property to develop an eco-friendly wellness community to help anybody who could use the help changing their lifestyle habits and heal from within to the best of their body's abilities, so that no one would have to go through what my family went through. It's watching a loved one, suffer and ultimately succumb to a terrible disease. And what happened during that time is I it was a the timing was really good to sell my business in 2006. The timing was really bad to invest in a speculative real estate development right before the global financial crisis. So I put $3 million, $2 million down on a $3 million property. I had exactly 12 months to come up with $1 million, or I was going to lose everything. And the global financial crisis was happening. So out of sheer necessity, I very quickly learned online marketing. This was 2009 at this time. Facebook hit 200 million users. And I spent a lot of time on Facebook trying to drive traffic from Facebook to my website. I ended up growing 2 Facebook pages to about 1.8 million followers. We drove traffic to our website, CostaRicaWellness.com, and ended up doing over $1 million in sales to customers we met on Facebook in under 12 months. I saved the property, I saved the business. Wasn't enough to actually build the dream community. So I had to put that project on hold, move back to San Diego, and then I started a marketing agency for doctors. So I had that marketing agency from 2010 to 2020. And over that time, we did over $22 million in sales for doctors who we helped them with all different types of marketing, everything from social media to even podcasts. And what we found, the most successful long-term marketing strategies tended to be virtual summits hosted by doctors for patients and health consumers, and podcasts. So we did that for a decade. And that entire time, I was always wondering why nobody's built YouTube for doctors. And so what I realized is, after asking myself that question for 5 years, I said, okay, I'll do it. So I, maxed out all the credit cards, hired a big team, and this was in the beginning of 2020. We launched Doctor Talks and got our first 10 clients. We did our first 10 summits. And then, of course, the pandemic hit in March of 2020. Turned out that actually ended up giving us a big tailwind. And now, 6 years later, we're the world's largest streaming platform for integrative and functional medicine doctors. And we love helping doctors grow their practice by getting on podcasts and starting their own podcasts.
That is amazing. Rakesh, what kind of questions do you want to ask Mr. Bret Gregory? He,
No,
he seems like
uh,
he's a wealth of knowledge here. I don't even know where to start.
no. The first question, that I want to ask is traditional healthcare marketing has always, like traditional, I mean digital, the traditional digital marketing on SEO, no, obviously, which is organic part, and then ads, and then there's always referrals, for years for the doctors, and then all of a sudden now podcasts are becoming one of the most powerful ways for doctors to grow their practice. So that's my question, Brett. Do you think podcasts are becoming, or do you think podcast is just for the people who are good on camera?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we've found, podcasts right now are the fastest growing segment of media, and by a giant margin. So, right now, just on Spotify, there's 850 million monthly active users. YouTube actually dwarfs that. So there's the amount of people consuming information on podcasts has grown like sevenfold in the last 3 years, and it's not slowing down. It keeps picking up. It keeps getting faster. And what works really well for doctors, I'll sum it up into one word: trust. When you have long form authority content by doctors who are already authorities to begin with, and they're able to educate through podcasts, you find that audiences and listeners really start to create a bond with the guest and the host. And so that long form authority um, translates really well to patients researching doctors differently than they might research other types of podcasts. And so, what we found is that trust translates from the podcast through to the prospective patient or customer. And it ends up being a great authority builder, trust builder, really helps doctors become the key opinion leaders that they should be. And at Doctor Talks, we have two missions. One is to help our 5 million annual listeners get the information they need directly from the source, which we believe is you, the doctor. And then the flip side to that same coin is we are democratizing the creator economy for doctors. That means we want to help doctors make money off of your information. And we think that doctors have just been squeezed from so many different angles, and it's completely unfair. And doctors are the key to better healthcare. I want to help you amplify your voices. And that's why we created Doctor Talks.
Awesome. I think that's a great way for any doctor to look at it. Like the common denominator is the trust. That is how we can create the trust. I think podcast is the best way to do it. So, like, most of the doctors are busy physicians, but they want more visibility. So, is it better to start their own podcast, or get booked as a guest or on other shows first?
Yeah, that's a great question. I definitely always recommend being a guest first. I mean, especially for a busy physician that wants more visibility. Um, if they're ready, able, and willing to start their own podcast, fantastic. But for sure, being a guest on a podcast is the right way to go initially. There's so many benefits to being a guest. And what I also found, I've been working with doctors for over 15 years, 16 years now. And when we've asked doctors to create what I like to call a signature talk, a lot of doctors think, okay, this is akin to, I'm going to speak on stage in front of an audience. I got to get my PowerPoint slides. I have to practice. I have to get ready. And there's a huge amount of preparation time and anxiety that goes along with that. But if you take that exact same doctor and that exact same information and you say, instead of creating a PowerPoint presentation, you help create a list of questions, and I'll give you a little tip later on how to do that in less than 5 minutes. You create a list of questions, give it to the host who's going to interview you. And that same doctor with that same information can prepare in 5 minutes and come up with an amazing talk that will do really get their message across, create that authority, key opinion leadership, answer the questions, build that relationship with the patient, client, or customer that they're trying to attract. And they can do all of that by initially being a guest. Now, there are some people who are ready to start their own podcast. There are also plenty of doctors out there that already have a podcast and they're ready to elevate their game. I'm a big fan of creating your own podcast. I just want to mention that, there's plenty of people that are afraid to do it. They're mostly worried about the time commitment. And granted, there's absolutely a time commitment to starting your own podcast. We've at Dr. Talks have figured out how to get that down to approximately 1 hour a week on average. I think the most important thing is to realize that you have to make it work for you. So there's over 2,300 doctors on Dr. Talks. We're producing, I think we've produced over 7,500 individual episodes at this point now. And it's important to understand that you have to make it work for you. So I have some doctors on one extreme where twice a year, they'll block out a few days to even a week on their calendar. And if they're the host of the podcast, they'll knock out 24 interviews in 5 days. That's one extreme, and then the other side of that is doctors who just really consistently do 1 hour a week. And they say, okay, I don't see patients on Tuesday afternoon, that's my podcast days. And they put that's blocked out in their calendar. And then once a week, they're doing a podcast. And sometimes I also recommend, if you're a podcast host, the fastest and easiest way to grow your podcast is to do interview swaps. And so that's finding other doctors who have audiences that you want to get in front of. They have a podcast, they have an audience, and they interview one another. And so you can, bust out two 25-minute interviews in approximately 90 minutes or less. So it's an incredibly efficient use of your time. And it's a great way to leverage your podcast to get yourself as a guest on other podcasts.
Well, I think interview swaps was a great one for any doctor, because a doctor is talking to a doctor, and it would be a great conversation just to forgetting about all the cameras from them. Many doctors assume, getting booked on podcasts require a heavy, PR agency, or we have to hire the PR agency. How can physicians actually get booked on podcast consistently, even for free?
Yeah. So I've always scratched my head when there's so many podcast booking agencies and PR agencies that charge 3,000 a month, 5,000 a month. I've seen some that charge $10,000 a month just to try and get people booked on podcasts. And what I've found is that because doctors are already an authority, you're in incredibly high demand. Having worked with thousands of doctors on, countless podcasts, I know that anybody who hosts a podcast, if they're doing it consistently, they're trying to get usually 52 episodes a year. They're always looking for guests, and doctors make fantastic guests. And that's why we've created the Dr. Talks platform, where doctors can create their own account for free and they can become a guest on podcasts for free. And it's podcasts hosted by other doctors. So we've created this whole ecosystem of doctors who can interview doctors, and they're always looking for new doctors to be guests on their podcasts. And it makes it so easy. Our platform, we've integrated it fully with AI to help match doctors with podcast hosts and vice versa. And there are podcast hosts who are just always actively looking for doctors. And so I would always encourage doctors, if you're out there listening right now, to do maybe a little mindset shift. I've heard a lot of doctors when I say, hey, you should start guesting on podcasts, I get a very common response is, why would anyone want to talk to me? or why am I the expert in this when there's so many other people out there? And the reality is, you are probably in much higher demand than you may think. So let's do a little mindset shift and think about all of the years and decades of knowledge that you have to give. Think about when you're talking to your patients who are just hanging on every word, they need to hear from you. They want to hear from you. So do that little mindset shift and just understand how valuable you are. The last thing that I'll say is when I started this podcast with my personal story of losing my brother. I was incredibly fortunate to have my father as a doctor. My mother was an end of life care specialist, and my brother was taken care of by my medical family through the last 9 months of his life, and it made me realize what a privilege it is to have a relative as a doctor, somebody who can genuinely love you and take care of you to the best of their abilities. And what I realized is that while I can't give everyone their own family member physician, the next best thing that I can do is give doctors the platform where our audience can listen directly to the doctors on demand at scale. And so I just want those doctors listening to just do that mindset shift and just realize how incredibly valuable you are and how special it is to have you.
Yeah. So what makes a great podcast topic or headline for doctors?
Excellent. Yeah. So, um, I have I love most of the doctors that I talk to have started using AI, started using ChatGPT or Claude. And what I always recommend is take 5 minutes, go on to ChatGPT and write this specific prompt. Say, help me come up with a catchy podcast title and subtitle on, and then fill in the blank of your area of expertise, whether it's menopause, longevity, diabetes, surgery, whatever it is, fill it in and let her rip. And what you'll see is it will come up very quickly with really engaging, catchy marketing type headlines. And you want this type of headline when you're going to reach out to another podcast host, whether that host is a doctor or it's a health influencer with a health audience, it doesn't matter. What does matter is that you've got a catchy headline that they want to interview you on. That works exceedingly well. And, you can sometimes call this a signature talk. You can sometimes, call this your signature podcast, your signature interview. But what it does is it really helps. It determines whether or not a podcast host is going to say yes. So the good news is because you're a doctor, you're probably like 80% of the way there. But what's going to get you that last 20% is that catchy headline, that catchy topic. Don't worry if you've heard other doctors and other experts speak on these other topics. The last thing that I'll say is when I'm talking to doctors and they say, well, okay, I want to, all right, I'll write a catchy headline. I want to get booked. And the first thing they say is, I want to get booked on Mark Hyman's podcast or Andrew Huberman's podcast. And I say that's a terrific goal to work up to. I wouldn't start that as your very first ask, as your first one. Try and do some more modest podcasts to get yourself started and get yourself going. And then by all means, work your way up. And you would be surprised. My other favorite technique of getting booked on podcasts is at Dr. Talks, we attend probably 12 to 14 conferences a year where we have a booth as a sponsor. And the conferences are doctors are going to a specific conference to get CE credits. At those conferences, you're going to see a lot of the speakers may have their own podcasts. Those are great if you're in the audience and you hear a specific doctor that you really love to follow. They happen to have their own podcast. After they're done with their talk, they're very open to talking to answering questions of all the doctors. And if you, as the doctor, go up to them and ask them if you can, build that relationship with them and say, hey, I've got this great podcast topic. If you're interested, I'd love to share it with you. many times you'd be surprised at how many really, really famous physician podcast hosts out there will say yes. And even maybe you've even never been on a podcast, but that's one of my favorite techniques of getting booked on the larger podcasts. And that's where, you kind of blend this face-to-face relationship building along with the podcast. And the last thing I'll leave with that particular question is if you have your own podcast, if you're the host, that's also a great way to book really famous guests or, and I'll temper the words really famous with maybe very well known in their particular field. And you would meet those people at a conference face to face in person. You could go to one conference and you could easily book your whole year or half a year of guests with very little effort by walking up to the doctors that you most want to engage with an interview and just simply asking them, "Hey, I'd love to interview you on my podcast." You'll be surprised. I would bet you'll get over 90% yeses.
Yeah, you're right. I think even in my personal experience, I've tasted that. When I interviewed other doctors, I was just having self-doubt on why a doctor would say yes to a podcast. And I just took a chance, and then most of them said yes. And then I was surprised. I can totally relate with you, whatever you said. You just take a chance and then just ask them, and then be present wherever they are, especially at the conferences that you said. Um, so, you're also building the AI tools for doctors. So, how can AI help physicians turn one podcast appearance into dramatically more engagement and reach for these doctors?
Yeah. So whether you're a guest or a host, at Dr. Talks, we started implementing AI throughout our website and our podcast approximately 2 years ago. And what we were able to develop is a system that will read all the transcripts of all the podcasts for the purpose of allowing the audience, the patient or health consumer, the ability to ask questions of the content. And this seemed like a natural way to allow people to increase their engagement. What we discovered that we had no idea we were going to discover is that it didn't just increase the engagement or watch time incrementally, it increased it by 10x, 10 times. So imagine, one of the big problems with that our podcast hosts talk about is everybody wants more watch time. And there's a lot of people who will have a podcast. Maybe we've got a 45-minute podcast or a 60-minute podcast. The patient wants to watch that podcast. They see the title, they see the topic. It sounds like, oh, yes, this is great information. I just don't have 45 minutes right now. I'll watch it later. And then, of course, later never comes. And so we thought by using AI and infusing AI in our podcasts on drtalks.com, we could help increase that. And we thought, okay, maybe we can get it up 10%, 15%. It went up 10x in an order of magnitude. It was absolutely incredible, the watch time. And so what we specifically discovered is the AI will read the podcast transcript and give prompt questions. So if it's a interview about menopause, it's going to give the top 5 questions that you would want to ask from that podcast. And you can select one of those, or you can simply type your own question. What it'll do is then very quickly read the transcripts, and it'll answer the question in plain English, and then it'll link to the video with a timestamp. So let's say that specific question gets answered at 17 minutes and 22 seconds. You can just push play on the video button and it'll start at 17 minutes and 22 seconds. And what we discovered is that provides instant gratification to the listener. So that might have been a 45-minute episode that they weren't originally going to push play on, but because they got their specific question answered instantly, they got that instant gratification, they started watching. And then what did they do? They watched more, not just a little more, 10x more. So that's a big part of what we've built in our AI tool. The doctors who are on our platform absolutely loved that. They said, hey, this is great, but I want this on my website. I want this to help answer the frequently asked questions that I always get. I want it to help me book more patient appointments. I want it to help me get more consults, drive more traffic, leads, and sales to our clinic. So we actually took that same concept that we spent 2 years and $250,000 building on Dr. Talks, and we've created DrTalks.ai. So for just under $299 a month, doctors can get that same ask me anything type of widget that will read all of their own content, and it helps them create new appointments, book new patients, generate new traffic, new sales on their website. The other beautiful thing about it is it only trains on their content. So they have full control over the content. It does not go out to WebMD or PubMed. And I think that's what Amazon and Google are trying to do. They're trying to build doctor in a box, which, we're trying to do almost the precise opposite. I think that actually takes away from what the good work that the doctors are doing. And on the what we're trying to do is the opposite. We're trying to amplify the doctor's voice, magnify the voice, and help them create more better patient outcomes and more revenue.
I think that's a really good opportunity for the doctors to look into Dr. Talks, because the visibility that they're gonna get would be much higher than any other platforms. As you said, it could be a box, and then what you're doing is exactly the opposite way to give doctors, as you said, democratizing the way the doctors talk and the whole content around the topic of medicine. If a doctor listening today wants to attract more patients in the next 90 days using podcasts and AI, what should their first steps be?
Yeah. Here's just a really simple roadmap. If you want to get booked on podcasts, start off, let's create a compelling podcast title. You can use your favorite AI chat widget, and in 5 minutes, create a really catchy podcast title and subtitle. Getting booked on shows, you can go to drtalks.com/connect, and you can create your own profile for free. It's going to ask you a few questions to set up your profile. You put in your headshot and bio, just like you have on LinkedIn. And then once your profile is approved, then you can start reaching out to other doctors who host podcasts, and you can get yourself booked on podcasts. I always recommend, when you use AI to create your signature talk and your title, also use AI to help it come up with 6 to 8 questions that you want to be asked, that you're going to deliver a really good answer for, and that's going to help you have a really strong interview. The last thing I'll mention is, when you get interviewed on the podcast, at the end, always ask, after you hang up with the host, always ask the host, what other podcasts should you be on, and who else could they refer you to that might be a great show for you to be on? And then you should reciprocate to them. You should refer them a few great guests that you know as well. And that's a great formula to get started.
Awesome. I think that's really a simple roadmap for any doctor to take from here. It's a great conversation, Brett. I think you're doing a great job, and it's a great platform for doctors and drtalks.com. So is there anything else that I haven't asked you that you want to talk about?
Well, I just want to say in closing, doctors, you already have the knowledge that patients are searching for. And the opportunity now is simply to put it in places where people are already listening. That means getting yourself booked on podcasts. It's the fastest way to build trust at scale. And when you combine that with AI to amplify your message, you can reach far more patients than you ever could inside of your clinic. So, rest with lots of comfort knowing that you're in high demand. And let's get your voice out there.
Yeah. I think I'm going to end this with, it's all about trust.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. And in a word, it's all about trust. And this is the fastest, easiest way for you to become that authority, that trusted authority. And we've created a free way for you to reach out to lots of other doctors who host great podcasts and get you booked today.
Yeah, I think that's great. You have a great resource, and I love Dr. Talks, and I love the direction that you're going into.
Thanks. Well, I really appreciate you guys. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you, Brett. Have a good day.
Great. Thank you.